Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series, where I take my party of intrepid players at my friendly local game store through Out of the Abyss, which is the 5th edition Underdark adventure for D&D. And along the way, I kind of give my thoughts on DMing and role-playing, and maybe we'll get into some rules a little bit. If you're a first-time viewer, uh, this is not an actual play. This is not a blow by blow of every little thing that happens in each session. Instead, what this is a recap of each session, kind of going over, what to expect at certain points in the campaign and how I handled things or maybe how I changed things or whatever. So if you're new, welcome. If you've been along for the ride for a while, thanks so much, and also welcome to you. And here we go. So I'm gonna get into some viewer feedback, and along with viewer feedback, let me put on my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback here. Along with viewer feedback, I'm going to talk about uh, an approach to playing role-playing games in groups that I think is very important. The world of sitting around a table with other people and playing a role-playing game, D&D or otherwise. We had an incident at my friendly local game store recently, where we had a group of players split over, from what I can tell, it sounds like stuff that is not worth splitting over. However, I wasn't there for everything, and human nature being what it is, a lot of times when you're angry and upset, it's not always about what you're arguing about. Maybe there's some other stuff, under the surface that's been building up, whatever. But I am going to use this as an opportunity to kind of share my thoughts in general on how to handle situations like this. So what happened was, as I understand it, and so if you're watching this and you were there and you know more details, feel free to add to the comments, but no attacks, only the facts. This is not a venue to continue a feud or anything like that. But if there's facts involved that add more information, then feel welcome to share that. As a reminder to my players of my group, if you're currently in the Out of the Abyss campaign with me, I'm really, I do ask you not to watch these videos because sometimes I'll talk about what's going to come. Now, you're an adult and I can't stop you. And once a campaign is finished, or an adventure like White Plume Mountain, I would love for you to watch all the videos and hear my insight. But, anyway, so it's just a reminder to my players. So, okay. So there was a group at my friendly local game store, of which the role-playing community has grown quite a bit. When I started DMing there almost 3 years ago in March, April, May, it'll be like 3 years. Um, it was just me running a game. The game store was like, "Hey, we need DMs," and I said, "Well, I'll DM," and it's gone from there. And now we have a lot of games almost every night, and that's fantastic. One, like the second or third group, maybe even been the second group to start after I started my group, was recently they had a falling out. And I'm not going to take sides here. I'm just going to present what I understand to have happened, and then I'll say, here's, it's a shame, and then give some thoughts on how to prevent it. If you're either the DM or a player in that situation, or maybe another group going through something like this, here's how I would handle it. Okay, so there was a question by one of the players about, do you use perception or investigation to find traps? And the DM answered, this is how I think it should be. And that question is not as cut and dry as you think. If you go, look in the player's handbook and then you read the online comments, even by the developer, not the developers, the designers, at Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast, D&D, it's not as open and shut as you might think. And evidently it's either the Skag or Xanathars, I think, maybe even adds more distinction or more nuance to it. So if it were me, and I'm not going to tell you how this DM ruled, that's not the point. If it were me, most of the time, I'm going to say investigation is what you use to find a trap. But if it could be just noticed through perception, then I may, passive perception may notice it. Or if somebody says, I'm just looking for anything that seems off, I may allow perception to find a trap. But if they're like, I'm looking for a trap on this door or on this floor or whatever, or on this chest, to me, that's an investigation roll. Again, it's not as open and shut as you might think. Go look. To me, as common and as important as searching for traps is in D&D, to me, it should come down to one skill, but it doesn't. So that's when you get into these arguments basically over how does it work. And remember, there's also rules as written, RAW, and then there's rules as interpreted, RAI. And Jeremy Crawford himself, the main guy behind the player's handbook or whatever, he's like, sometimes he'll say RAW, it's this way. RAI, you can do it however you want. So, and then of course there's house rules. So the player's handbook or the dungeon master's guide or whatever may say this is how you do it, but at your table, your DM or everybody collectively could say we're going to house rule it this way. Okay, so remember, the rules, which are important. I mean, I personally tend to land on the side of the rules usually, if only because, why are we buying these $50 rule books if there's no rules, right? And there's wiggle room and there's house rules and, you learn to disregard this or take that. But for the most part, we're buying these books. We are learning these books. We tell people, hey, get the player's handbook and da-da-da. So for the most part, I usually go by the rules, and if I deviate, I usually try to explain to my players why and then make it consistent. So the DM they're like, well, do we use this or this? And, the DM was like, well, here's how we're going to do it. And then there was one player, and this happens in groups, not just D&D groups, but it definitely happens in D&D and role-playing groups. There's one player that just could not evidently let that go. And it kept coming up and kept coming up and kept coming up. And then I guess the DM, from what I understand, finally said, just whichever one you want. If you want to use perception or investigation, use that. Even though that wasn't their preferred way to do it, but it was just too much of a point of contention at the table. And then for whatever reason, it kept snowballing from there to the point where the DM wasn't having any fun. Evidently, a lot of the players weren't having fun. The DM's wife actually contacted me asking for advice on how I would handle it. And ultimately, the group split. And several of the players split off and formed another group at the store. So that's a fail, right? I'm not putting blame on any person, but as far as having fun and having a D&D group, and this group's been playing together for a while, and to splinter and fork off and all that, and to the point where nobody's having fun and everybody's angry, to the point where the players are going and talking to the store owner and pleading their case and trying to evidently wanted the store owner to force the DM to do something a certain way or whatever. The whole thing's a fail. You don't even have to put blame on any one person. It's a fail as far as having fun playing D&D goes. So having said all that, I'll tell you how I would have handled it and how I handle stuff like this. First and foremost, we're there to have fun. And once the case is made and, hey, DM, how are we going to do this? And there's discussion. And I'm not saying the DM should not listen. The DM should accidentally absolutely listen to what the players are saying and well, I think that the skill would work this way and da 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 da. But sooner or later, and there's a great discussion in Xanathar's Guide to Everything about the role of the DM. Sooner or later, the DM arbitrates, referees what's going on, and you move forward. So whether that player or players liked how the DM was doing it, at a certain point, I feel, and again, I wasn't there. I'm just going off the information I have. So let's, even if it didn't happen that way, hypothetically, let's say there was a group that had a problem and the one of the players just didn't like the ruling. At a certain point, that player needs to zip it and move forward, because the game isn't just about them. And if they are just absolutely, I just can't handle that decision, leave the group. Don't keep bringing it up. Don't keep whatever. Okay, don't keep, because now there's people who were just trying to have fun, but that one player, because they want to make it a hill to die on, won't let it go, and then starts, enlisting other people to be on their side, and just won't let it go. So, and whether it's about how do you check for traps or not, I mean, this is human nature. I've seen this kind of thing. So, as DM, if I were DMing, again, I would say, okay, well, okay, you're concerned. Let me go revisit it. And then I would either say, okay, well, I made a wrong decision, which I do sometimes, or I would say, no, I think that's how we're going to do it in this game. I mean, if I want to, as the DM, not that I'm just saying, oh, I'm the DM, but I mean, I have the leeway to house rule something. Say, this is how we're going to house rule it at this table. So I get house rule something, or a DM could house rule something, so checking for traps has nothing to do with perception or investigation, right? So that's why I don't want to get bogged down in the details of what the argument is about. I want to take it to the higher level, that whatever it was, let it go for the good of the group, because there's a social contract at that table that everyone's showing up there every week or however often you play to have fun. And I'm as a DM, I'm fine to if somebody just won't let something go, I'll talk to them privately and say, this is really becoming an issue, and if you keep it up, I'm going to remove you from the game. And if they keep it up, I'll just remove them from the game. And then if other people storm off with them, so be it. But that's not what I would prefer. But at a certain point, the toxicness of what's happening becomes more important than the actual argument, right? Well, the rule says this, and I know that I'm right, and you're being unfair to me. Okay, all right, but there's more people at the table than just you, and the decision's been made. And if oh my goodness, if some player goes to the store owner or the store employees to plead with them for the store to come force me to run the game a certain way, that's not going to go really well no matter what happens. I mean, I'm really going to be unhappy with that with the player, because that's just petty, I'm going to run to mommy and daddy kind of stuff. And then also, if the store did intercede, I'd be like, no, that's not how it works. Now, if I was just being egregious, if the DM is just really out of bounds or being a jerk, that's different. But if the point is they don't like how I ruled on a rules question, I'm sorry. In fact, I would double down at that point to not show players that they don't like something I'm doing, then go run to the store. And the store comes, oh, you got to do it. Not that the store I'm at, I don't even think they would do that. I'm just saying the principle. So what I'm saying is that the group experience of D&D and role playing and the fun everybody's trying to have is more important than one player being right about something. So if you're a player and you can't let something go to the point where you become a toxic situation in the game, that's on you. That's on you, especially if the DM or the GM or whatever, has heard you out and has explained why they've ruled a certain way. And then they're consistent. Beyond that, I don't know what to tell you. So if you know if you're going to be toxic, do yourself a favor and remove yourself from the group, because you may see yourself as this champion of righteousness and right in the game, but really, I guarantee you there's some people at the table that just wish you'd shut up. Even if they think you're right. Just shut up so we can get past this, because we're not here for you to be right. We're here to play a game and have fun.
That's when to grow on.
And you know the DM or the GM is, and I say this a lot in this series, is there to have fun too. And if I have a player that's basically the equivalent of a toothache, I'm going to go get that tooth pulled sooner or later. So, you know, again, I can't say enough. You know, if it comes to a situation where, you know, one player has to be right, or this half of the players are against the other players, or whatever, just step back. Whether you're the DM, whether you're a player, whatever, and say, is whatever I'm doing right now, or whatever argument we're having, is it worth the disrupting the fun of the group? Now, every group, every now and then, is going to have a little bit of tension. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this toxic situation that won't go away. And one or two players or whatever won't let it go. And even though they said they're going to let it go, they bring it up in little snide comments or this or that or whatever. So, you know, what's more important? Are you there to have fun and to help other people to have fun? Or are you there to be right? And for other people to acknowledge how strong your will is in bending things to how you want it to be. So another thing I would advise this group to do, but I think that the problem had already proceeded past this point. I advised them to, I said, take a few weeks off, take a couple of weeks off, let things cool down, and then come back. But I think if it gets to that point, I think that's much preferable to let people cool down than it is to let the group fall apart. Just say, hey guys, we're just gonna take a couple of weeks off. Let's just cool down. You know, we're all friends here, and you know we've invested in this game. You know what? You know whatever. So, and then you know, as a DM, if some of this advice I'm giving to players also applies to the DM, because the DM's a player too, and in some ways can influence the situation more than anybody else. Is a group self-destructing worth sticking to your guns on a roll? And in some cases it may be. You're like, no, I mean, that makes sense, and I've explained myself, and now we're just dealing with immaturity. Or it could be, you know, if there's a really big blowback on you, you know, you as a DM or a GM also should step back and say, you know, have I caused this? Am I being unnecessarily firm or whatever? Am I keeping the group from having fun? And that's a hard line to walk, because as DM, I mean, your role is to, you know, tell the story or help facilitate the story, but you're not just a storyteller. D&D, despite what I hear a lot of people, is not just a storytelling game. There's rules, there's dice, there's a game engine, and the DM or the GM or whatever, depending on whatever setting you're playing or system, is critical for making sure that that part of it is as coherent and consistent as possible. And at the end of the day, there's some times where you have to say, well, this is how we're going to go. So I just want to say, I'm sorry that this happened to that group. I would ultimately hope that maybe they'll get back together. It sounds like I'm talking about a divorced couple or whatever, but you know, that they would get back together as a group. But you know, if you're a player leading a charge against your DM or GM, step back for a second and, you know, is this really worth it? Because even if I get my way, even if I prove my point, even if it's a righteous good point, you know, is it worth the toxicness and the headache and the bad feelings? And then again, if you're the DM, you know, step back. If you really get blowback, and you don't normally get blowback, you know, step back and reevaluate. You know, I think if I had to choose, uh, in this situation, you know, if it came down to, you know, my group like unified, or several people in my group was like, we just really don't like the way you did that. And I mean, to the point where it's bothering us that we might want to leave. You know, when it comes to how do you, find traps, I'd be like, okay, which way do you want? And they're like, well, we want to investigate. I'd be like, okay, investigation. Because even though I disagree with that, you know, my group that I play with doesn't argue a lot. So if they suddenly argued over me on something, I'd probably let the first one go instead of creating a toxic situation. But then you have the danger of, then they're like, oh, well, all we have to do is throw a fit every time. So you want to, you know, if they start throwing a fit, say, hey, I changed the last time for harmony, but I'm not changing again. That's not how we're going to do things here. So, you know, we could talk for a long time about this. Maybe if we get a lot of comments back, I'll do a separate video on it, but I'm going to stop it there. I just want to say, remember that D&D and role-playing games at the table and all that, or on Roll20 or whatever, is a group experience. And very rarely is that really pushing a point and not letting it go because you know you're right, worth it in a group experience.
That's one to grow on.
And I'll just leave it at that. So, okay. Thank you for the mini rant or whatever that was. You know, wow. Okay, so let's go to viewer feedback, the real viewer feedback now. Let's take a look here. So we've got Vasily Odin Krisan said, and this is the comments from video 66, said, hey Shane, I want to get your thoughts on the Beholder's central eye and its anti-magic effect. Would you rule that it also disrupts a druid's shape change? How about a warlock's summon weapon from Pact of the Blade? Not specifically to unsummon it, but rather would you allow the warlock to summon it while in the area of the cone? And the way I answered it, I said, from what I understand, by memory, I didn't go look this up and I still haven't, anti-magic will disrupt, reset anything magical. So I think innate creature abilities aren't dispelled, but pretty much everything else is. And then I did say for these specific examples, I may wait till the actual video of the session where they fight the Beholder, since it will apply directly to that discussion. Stay tuned. And that's in fact what I've decided to do. Not this video, but the next video, unless something just really strange happens, they'll be fighting the Beholder. So that'll be a great time to get into anti-magic. However, and I was joking around with Vasily and I said, but you do realize you're opening a pretty big can of worms related to rules as interpreted versus rules as written versus rules as interpreted, don't you? And I was joking around. He goes, yeah, I see that. I said, I see the potential. I was just curious about your thoughts on it from experienced DM's perspective. And then Rob Plummer said, I believe it is all things magical, even magic items, lose their properties while in the cone. So all things will be affected, including the Pact Blade and the shape change. That's my 2 as a DM. So anyway, so that's Rob's input on that. And I think Rob's right. I'm going to go look it up for next video because, you know, it'll definitely apply. But I kind of went, and it was a great question, Vasily. I just wanted to, or Vasily, send me a comment that lets me know exactly how to pronounce your name, because I always feel like I'm pronouncing it wrong. So I apologize for that. You know, I want to wait until when we really unpack what anti-magic does. I want to wait till it's in the middle of the fight with the Beholder. So just set tight, and it'll be soon. So Graham Husick said, hey Shane, where do you get your sound effects? Sounds for the purple worm humming and busting in the chamber are fantastic. And it's basically various places. Usually I kind of, you know, I'll get a thought like, oh, this would work there. And more often than not, I go to YouTube and find a clip or find something and take a clip off of it. Sometimes I have a sound file already. Sometimes I'll load a movie into my, you know, my computer and do a quick grab off of it. But it's really all over the place. But I mean, YouTube, you know, there's so much stuff on YouTube. So, and you know, you have capture software or whatever, and you just capture a little snippet while it's playing. I don't even download directly from YouTube. I have software that will capture, video or sounds or whatever images off of my monitor. So it's actually, I'm capturing either a sound or a section of my monitor. That way you don't even have to download, you download and convert a lot of stuff or anything like that. Now, Michael Miska pointed out, and this is very helpful, Michael, I appreciate it, said there are rules for harvesting poison in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And what he's talking about is my player that plays a rogue wanted to harvest poison out of a purple worm. And so I was like, well, how do I handle that? So on the fly, I came up with this, and I think it's in last video. Well, it is in last video because Michael's responding to video 66. I came up with this whole way of getting the poison from a purple worm without, poisoning yourself. And you had, have a chance of poisoning yourself. So let's go to here. I went and looked it up. Very, very handy. Michael, I appreciate you pointing this out. And I should have known this because I've looked over this area in the Dungeon Master's Guide before. But on page 258 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, it says a character can attempt to harvest poison from a poisonous creature such as a snake, wyvern, or carrion crawler. The creature must be incapacitated or dead, and the harvesting requires 1d6 minutes followed by a DC 20 intelligence nature check. Proficiency with the poisoner's kit applies to this check if the character doesn't have proficiency in nature. On a successful check, the character harvests enough poison for a single dose. On a failed check, the character is unable to extract any poison. If the character fails the check by 5 or more, the character is subjected to the creature's poison. So the way I did it was different mechanically, but kind of captured the same spirit. You have a chance of doing it, and you can fail. And if you fail real bad, then you can poison yourself, which is pretty much what I did. Just I had different mechanics for getting there. Now, it also has rules in this area of the Dungeon Master's Guide for crafting poison, for purchasing poison, and then it goes through several poison types. Assassin's blood, burnt author fumes, carrion crawler mucus, yes, purple worm poison, pale tincture, truth serum, oil of Taggart, etc. And a purple worm poison price per dose is 2,000 gold pieces. So that didn't even cross my mind when the player said that they wanted to harvest it. So they've got 2,000 gold pieces worth of purple worm poison. So it goes into the type of damage that it does and other things for those various types of poisons. So if you're not already familiar with that, I recommend you go check it out. And thanks again, Michael. Great feedback. Okay, Cody Lloyd said, Shane, took me a little bit to catch up, as is the trend for me lately. I've started running Princes of the Apocalypse. Cool. I think that was the main campaign right before Out of the Abyss, and it was sort of Elemental Evil updated for 5th edition. I said we had a session 0 and be starting the campaign tomorrow. These videos definitely help me as a DM on how to handle encounters and players, even if it's a completely different campaign. Hopefully one day I will actually run Out of the Abyss, but for now, just taking notes. Also looking forward to the Arkansas RPG Con, because I missed the first one. All right, yeah, Cody, love to see it. Arkansas RPG Con in August in Maumelle, Arkansas, which is basically Little Rock metro area. And yeah, you're saying, hey, these videos are helpful even though you're not running Out of the Abyss right now. And that's why I do the viewer feedback. And I go into my thoughts as a DM, and I spend so much time looking at the rules or the situations or the dynamics or the principles of Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games. And I've had some people say, hey, can you just let us know? Can you put a link in the video notes when viewer feedback's over so they can just get the Out of the Abyss part? And that's fine. But I would encourage you to watch it all, because that's why I do that. That's why I go through all this stuff is because it can be applied outside of just Out of the Abyss. So there you go. Let me make sure I went over all the viewer feedback here. I'm pretty sure I did. Vasily, stand tight. We will go into the Magic anti-magic very soon. But for the like I said, for the time being, just assume that if it's not an innate creature ability, it basically will either dispel or prevent summoning or prevent summoning of stuff. Yeah, that's everything. So everybody, thanks so much for the viewer feedback. And now we will get into the recap proper, if you will. And I'm going to take off my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback. And I'm also going to take on, normally don't have my headphones on. I don't know why I left them on, but for this part of the video, I'll go ahead and take them off and we'll get going. Okay, so I mentioned last video, I was talking about that spell book, or that book on magic, a treatise on magic or whatever, that the wizard borrowed from Vizeran. And Vizeran was like, okay, you can borrow it if you want. Actually, Gren the apprentice relayed that from Vizeran. And it's basically kind of like the Necronomicon from H.P. Lovecraft. If you read it, you have a chance of, going crazy. So, and then I completely forgot to mention what kind of mechanics I came up with for that spell book. So if you want to do something similar in one of your games, or even in Out of the Abyss, what I did was every time he reads it, he has a chance of going mad, or developing a level of madness. And there was a short rest they did on last video or last session that he studied the book instead of taking a short rest and getting the benefits of whatever the short rest. And then this past session, they took a long rest, and he also spent some time studying the book. I didn't take away from his rest or getting spell. It's an 8-hour rest. I think that out of that 6 hours, you have to be, resting, and that leaves 2 hours for other stuff. So he did a second read, and both times it has not given him a level of madness. But what I did was, I said that the first read through, I need a wisdom check at DC 12. And then the second read at DC 15, third read DC 18, and on and on. So you notice there's a trend of it increases by 3 each time. So 12, 15, 18. I don't know what the upper limit will be. I don't know how many reads I'm going to say it's before I say, well, you finished it. I'm still kind of playing that by ear. But eventually, I'll, even if he develops a little bit of madness, eventually I'll say, you finished it. And then I've got to determine, will there be any sort of reward to his character for, reading the book. And so I'm still kind of working my way through that, because the whole book thing was very spontaneous. But I said, well, okay, if you're going to ask for a book on magic from, a drow archmage, then, let's have some fun with that. So if you fail one of those saving throws, then you get a level of madness per the Out of the Abyss rules. And if you've got, it starts with short-term madness, then long-term madness, I think, permanent madness. I don't know. It keeps going up, and you develop levels of madness. Remember, Out of the Abyss has a slightly different, well, not slightly different, it is a different way of handling madness than regular D&D and the Dungeon Master's Guide. You develop levels of madness, almost like the sanity system in Cthulhu, Call of Cthulhu. So remember, go refresh yourself on that if you're. I know I've discussed it at length in some previous videos, but it's in chapter. I think they talk about it in chapter 2 of the Out of the Abyss campaign book. So every time he fails one of those, he's already made his DC 12. He's already made his DC 15. The next time he says he wants to read it, it's going to be a DC 18, and on and on. And I'll probably go up to maybe 5 times total. The next one will be 21, and then after that 24. So he still feasibly could pass it without getting any madness, but increasing chances. And what I'm thinking of, and I'd love to have your thoughts too. Maybe you have some thoughts on how to handle this. I'm thinking that, as if he reads the whole book, I'm thinking about either giving the player improved counter spell against certain types of spells, probably necrotic, or I would pick a type of spell or two that it would apply to, or maybe I would give him resistance or immunity to certain specific spells, not a spell type. What is it, school magic, but actually specific spells. So those are the kind of the ways that I'm kind of going with it. But anyway, I'd love to have your thoughts. So sorry that I talked about this book and everything and said, oh, I have these mechanics for how to use it. And then I totally forgot to go over the mechanics. So, all right. Anyway, so, getting back to the actual Worm Nursery. Oh, let me go over one other thing. Here's one other thing. I like to talk about stuff in general that came out of a session before I go into they went to this cave and then they fought this monster and that kind of thing. The player that I have that plays a cleric said she was going to be out in a couple of weeks. So said, hey, and gave me a date like a couple of weeks down the road, said I'm going to be out for whatever reason. And I said, okay, well, that's fine. And she's like, well, can so-and-so play my character while I'm not there for the heals? Because that's their only healer. And so what they're saying is, I'm not going to be here, but can somebody play my character, but really only play that character to use for heals? And I said, that's fine. And I'm just throwing this out there so I think every situation like that has a little bit of give and take. I said that was cool, but if she specifically says that her character is going to be there that week, because sometimes if somebody's not there that week, their character kind of fades into the background. They're still there. They didn't just teleport out, but they don't really do anything. But they're also not going to be subject to attacks and that sort of, unless there'd be like a trap that affected like every player, something like that. I said, that's cool, but you could also be a target of attacks or situations if you are quote unquote there. So, if a monster runs into the room and they're saying they're there, my character's there and somebody else is playing them, then that character's going to be in a marching order and all that, even if they're only casting healing spells, because that can make a pretty big difference in the game. So I'm not going to go out of my way to go after them, but they could be legitimate targets of attacks and stuff like that. So that's how I handled that. Perhaps you handle it differently. Encourage your thoughts and feedback on that. So anyway, getting back to the actual Worm Nursery where we finished last session, they were in they had just finished the spider cave. They had fought, I had doubled the amount of spiders to 6, I think it was 16. Was it 8 normally? And I'd say we're going to fight 16 spiders because, this party's pretty OP. Not only are they twice the normal size of a party, but, they're kicking butt. So I just threw more spiders in there to make it a little bit more of an interesting combat because, they just buzzsaw through everything. So that's area 11 in the Worm Nursery. So they went over to area 10, which is the Slop Cave. And this is just a 60-foot high cavern that's covered in a thick layer of viscous purple worm saliva. Ooh. Consequently, the floor is difficult terrain. As they enter, adventurers notice dozens of glinting objects in the goo beneath their feet. Further inspection reveals the sparkling objects are precious gems. For every minute the adventurers spend in this cave, there's a 25% chance they attract the attention of 1d4 giant spiders from Area 11. I ignored that one because they killed all the spiders. But 2, even if I wanted to have more spiders or they hadn't killed them all, I'm ready for them to leave the Worm Nursery, to be quite honest. So I don't want any more combats at this time. And they've already fought 16 actually 17, because they fought one giant spider over in the main cavern area when they were first in there harvesting or trying to get an egg. The spiders scuttle along the walls and ceiling, avoiding the gooey floor. So it's basically saying the spiders don't have to worry about difficult terrain. If the adventurers take 10 minutes to search through the goo, they can retrieve a total of 50 gold point gems. Or gold piece. And, my party is diamond hungry right now because we've I've started saying that even though most spell components you can just pay the gold piece value of, I've started saying healing stuff or something that prevents death or brings somebody back from the dead. And not healing as in, preventing death, but, stuff like, it's gotta be this, really, combat altering thing. Like, you should be dead, but you're not, right? Not just I threw a healing spell on you. I've started saying, well, you've got to use the actual spell component, and that would, in most cases, it's diamond. So they were like, hey, are they diamonds? And in this case, I said no. So there you go. And my players convinced themselves that the slop was either purple worm urine or purple worm poop. And, I kept saying, well, no, you don't get the feeling it's that, but it's this kind of vaguely transparent, goopy, yeah. And they never thought, oh, it's spit, or saliva. As far as I know, none of them ever guessed that. So, and from there, the rogue, because the other players were kind of blah, 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 talking and this and that. The rogue, he'll do this every now and then. He says, I'm going to go explore around. So he went up to area 9, which is a bat cave. And, I explained, and these bats, says the bat cave, it's not Batman or Robin. It's a literal bat cave. How cool are they? Like, we're to the bat cave, and there's like a Batmobile in there, and like Batman hanging out, like, what's up? And he's like at his computer, and the D&D dudes are like, what's going on here? And anyway, this cave is thick with stalactites and stalagmites, and home to holy alternate plane, Batman. Sorry, home to thousands of bats. The cavern floor is covered in a thick layer of guano, making the floor difficult terrain. Guano is bat crap. It's a nice way of saying bat crap. The bats spend most of their time clinging to the cavern's 60-foot high ceiling, but the noise of the purple worms drives them into a shrieking, flipping, or flapping frenzy. Whenever a purple worm enters the Area 8, whether as a random encounter in response to alarm from Area 5, a swarm of bats flies out of the cave 1 minute before the worm appears. Roll a d6 to determine which way the bats go. On a roll of 1 to 3, the bats take the shortest route to the tunnel in Area 7 and exit. On a roll of 4 to 6, the bats take the shortest route to the tunnel in Area 14 and exit. The swarm doesn't attack unless threatened, but any creature that occupies an area the swarm passes through is buffeted by scores of bats, taking 1d4 bludgeoning. When the purple worm that caused the bats to swarm exits the nursery, the bats return to his cave to roost 10 minutes later. Now, I have not been using the bats, but they're a nice atmospheric touch. Just something else to kind of harass the players with. So, they don't have to, as we just discussed, they don't necessarily have to go into the bat cave to get harassed by the bats. When a purple worm shows up, things should be happening with the bats. I haven't been doing that personally, but, why not? Go for it if you want. And this player, just the rogue, kind of walked in, looked around, said there's guano all over the floor. And he was like, oh, okay. And he walked back out. He didn't mess with the room anymore. Now, it doesn't say anything in here about disturbing the bats and causing them to buffet around and stuff unless a purple worm shows up. But I mean, if you want to have the bats swoop and swarm on the players just to, whoa, give them something to mess with for a second, break up, the monotony of exploring or whatever. The monotony of exploring. If you just need to have a tension breaker or have some fun, stick the bats on them. Why not, right? You could even play with rabies. I don't know if in the book bats have rabies, but sure, why not, right? As the DM, you can have some fun with that. And then from there, while the party was still in Area 10 talking, and are we gonna keep exploring? Are we gonna go back and get the expedition and try? What are we gonna do? The rogue just traipsed up into the northernmost Area 5 in the Worm Nursery. And as you remember, all of the Area 5s, all 3 of them, were echo chambers, like we've talked about before. Covered them in pretty good detail last session. Noise will set the fibers, the solidified saliva fibers, membranes, vibrating and humming, and that will attract a purple worm. And then it's an alarm system, and the purple worm will come in and do its thing and look for intruders and da da da. So the rogue just, walks right in there, because he went back to area 10 and said, hey, bat guano, whatever, I'm going to go this way while you guys are talking and explore a little bit. So he goes into that northernmost area 5, and he failed his stealth check. Now, I didn't have to give him a stealth check because he didn't say he was stealthing. He just said, I'm going in there. But to be nice, because I'm trying to avoid another purple worm encounter. Now, I'll let one happen if it happens, but I'm trying not to push one. I went ahead and I said, well, give me a stealth check, even though he specifically didn't say he was stealthing. And he failed it, which was, kind of crazy because it's only a DC 10 and he's got good stealth, but he failed it straight up. I mean, it happens. And so here come the purple, they hear the humming and, roar, and everyone's like, oh, here comes the humming. And then it sets the other echo chambers off humming and the, and the sympathetic harmonies and all that or whatever. And so the rogue said, I freeze. And so I gave him another stealth check. And then in area 10, which is that slop cave, I said, what's everybody doing? And everybody pretty much said, we're stealthing and freezing. And a couple of people said that we're getting up against the wall. And I think the guy with the shield guardian said, we're the shield guardian, we're all getting up against the wall. So there was like 2 players and the shield guardian got up against the wall. And then everybody else was just at various random places around the chamber. So what I did was, it's supposed to come in from area 7. Now, were I sticking to my, and people contradict themselves all the time, and I'm no exception from that. I'm like, man, I want to get out of the Purple Worm Nursery and get back to, let's go get to the Beholder and the Vast Oblivion and all that. But I'm like, let's have a little fun with this. So I said, I'm going to randomly roll, because by the books, the purple worms, when they're summoned by the humming, are supposed to come in from area 7, circle around a few times, and then if they don't encounter any intruders, they leave back through area 7 again. If they encounter intruders, they'll try to kill them. The big purple worm fight. 2 videos ago, go check that out. The purple worm fight. So let's have some fun with this. So, there's 4, remember, I don't have T2 and T3 tunnels open. Like, those are purple worm tunnels that are supposed to open up after they first get to the purple worm or the worm nursery. I didn't open those up. So by the map for the worm nursery, there's 4 main entrances and exits from that main area 8. And I said, well, I'm just going to roll a D4 to determine, which way it's coming from. And, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I rolled, and it just happened to be the exit or the entrance or whatever that's closest to them that leads up to the northernmost echo chamber. So I looked at that and I went, okay, now where does it come from there? And I said, there's 3 main chambers there that it could come from. And I said, I decided that it could come in from that uppermost 5 echo chamber, or it'd come in at 9, the bat cave, or it would come in at 10, which is where they're all standing around in the slop. And I rolled randomly, like I think, on a D6, and lo and behold, it by the dice, I may have even included 11 and did like a D8, or a D4 or something. I can't remember what I did, but by the dice, boom, it's purely randomly selected, coming through chamber 10, where the majority of the party, except for the rogue, is standing. Now remember, the expedition is back in area 1 because they've been camped out there the whole time. And I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me. But at the same time, I'm like, so they all rolled and they all made their stealth checks. So they don't have to worry about that. But I ruled, because that area 10 is not that big. I mean, it's big, but it's not huge. And the purple worm is gargantuan, I said I'm going to give it a chance to sideswipe one of you people that are standing there frozen up. Now, I excluded the rogue, and I excluded the players in the shield guardian that said they were up against the wall. So that was fair enough, because that's actually one of the tips that the dark hunters, the drow purple worm egg hunters will give, is like, get up against the wall and freeze. So everybody else is just kind of stealth. So the purple worm comes through, and I said I'm going to give it a 50% chance of striking somebody. I rolled like a 40 something. I'm like, yikes. I mean, the dice are wanting somebody to get hit by this worm. So then what I decided, that's okay, somebody's getting sideswiped by this thing. And so I randomly determined that by the amount of players in there, with, I think there were 5 potential targets, and I used a D10, 1 through 2 is 1, 3 through 4 is another, 5 through 6 is right, and so on. And I rolled a character that it actually kind of fit, because they had already stated they were kind of out more in the middle of the room when they froze. And lo and behold, they got hit, because I rolled under 50%. That means somebody's getting hit. And then I randomly rolled who, and it was that character. And so then what I said, I determined that I said, whoever gets sideswiped by this thing, it's gonna basically do the bite damage without the chance of swallowing. So they're not literally getting bit, but they're, getting kind of smashed. And if it came down to like what kind of damage, I would say it was bludgeoning damage, even though I think the bite's piercing, right? So, but I said, give me a DC 15 dex save and you'll take half damage. And they're a monk, so they made it. So they still took some damage, but they dodged some of it. So that was exciting. And my point with that was not to kill anybody, but just to reinforce the fact that, in the whole Wormwrithings, at any time you can encounter a purple worm. But if you're in a Worm Nursery, the more you explore and hang around, I even said it's almost as if, I was kind of joking. I said it's almost as if being in a Worm Nursery is kind of dangerous. Like you might run into more than one purple worm, and they're like, but we're exploring. So anyway, but I'm thinking you've got the egg. Go, I'm trying not to tell them to go. That's their choice, but I'm making the point. It's freaking dangerous in here. So anyway, so then, I get to, you guys hear it circling around in the main chamber 8. And then I rolled to see which way it exited instead of, and the rogue, I think, oh yeah. Well, so first of all, I had it plow through, the wall, and bust into area 10. And then it kept going and drilled burrowed another tunnel or whatever, from area 10 to area 8. And it just kind of kept going. And the rogue, was kind of like, when he heard it, circling around, he kind of crept down to kind of keep an eye on it. And then some people from inside area 10 started going down that newly formed tunnel that was kind of slicking whatever, because it had dragged some of that saliva with it. And I also said a newly formed tunnel is kind of slick anyway. Sure, why not? Just throwing that in. I don't know if it is or not. So they're kind of watching it. More than one party member is kind of watching this worm while it's doing its circling. And then I rolled randomly to see which way it exited. Again, by the book, they should come in from area 7 circle and go back out. I'm having a little fun with it. So I rolled, and this time it exits towards the area where the expedition, off to the west, because that's where the expedition is at. And they're like, oh no. And then from there, because once it goes into that area, there's, I think like potentially 4, let's see, there's area 4, 3, 2, and 1. And it went into area 3. So I gave it a chance of going to area 4, area 2, or area 1. If it goes to area 1, guess what's in area 1? The expedition. That's probably not going to bode well for the expedition. And also remember, in area 4, there's still a couple of guards that they've told to stay there with crossbows and kind of guard that. But the purple worms boom straight into area 4. And then the point from there, I'm like, I rolled, I knew which way it went. It went up to area 2, which is the fungus grove and all that, but they didn't know that. So they're kind of freaking out. Another thing, the wizard sent his owl familiar flapping after the worm to try to keep an eye on it. But I think once you get past, it's either 60 or 100 feet or something like that, you can't maintain that mental visual link or whatever with a familiar. So he was unable to. And you remember that central chamber of Area 8 is pretty big. The Worm Nursery itself is pretty big. So after a while, the owl got out from the wizard being able to directly see through its eyes and I think be telepathic and all that. So anyway, I went up through Area 2 and avoided the expedition. But by the rolls, if it would have rolled for Area 1, I would have let it go through there and cause some havoc because, I've had some fun with the NPCs in the expedition, but I've made no secret of the fact that keeping up with all these NPCs has worn me out. But it has been fun. I just wish there were better guidelines and more specific structure and rules for dealing with all these NPCs and the expedition and everything. It does give you some, but sites like Elven Tower and some other sites I've linked before give much better direction. And then in the Vast Oblivion, or Blast Oblivium, which is where the Beholder's at, I'm just gonna tell you right now, they can get like dozens more NPCs, and I'm personally not doing that, but just be aware that there's potential to recruit more NPCs into the expedition, and there's more NPCs to deal with in general. They're slaves of the Beholder. So, room 3 is where the worm went through, and then it can go to either 4, 1, or 2. Sorry for the confusion. It's room 3 where the 2 expedition guards are with the crossbows. So what I determined, they're like, oh no, so they're running that way, and I gave I think a 50% chance for one of those expedition members to get eaten by the worm, and I rolled that. I'm big on randomly. I just decided to throw and then see. Sometimes I'll just say, oh, well, somebody got eaten, but I kind of like that knuckle-biting drama of a dice roll. And I rolled, and sure enough, I rolled under 50% again, and one of the 2 guards, just that worm went through and just ate it without even knowing they were there. Just, just like a whale going through the sea and just eating up some shrimp or something. I mean, it just got it and kept going. And then it exited out Area 2 and left the expedition alone down in Area 1. So the party's like, oh, and they run and they get into Area 3, and that one guard is like, big worm, and he's kind of freaking out, a little, shell shocked, and the other guy's just gone, and it's obvious, where the worm went, like, leaving a trail, and they follow it and see that it went up to 2 and went out that way. At the same time, destroying, most of the fungus and stuff, even though they didn't try to harvest any more fungus. But luckily, Area 1 was okay with the and they go around there, and Eldith and a lot of the expedition people are kind of coming up that way, and they're like, whoa, freaking out, and yet they've lost yet another expedition member to purple worms. So at this point, the players, kind of thought to themselves, it might be a little dangerous around here, and maybe it's time to go. And, what they had been doing was looking around for an exit to the Wormwrithings, because they're trying to go 12 miles from the Wormwrithings to the Vast Oblivium where the Beholder is. And that's exactly what they did. So, or that's exactly what they're wanting to do. And that is what they did. They finally exited, but they've had an exit the entire time. From Area 1, they can go up. Because they collapsed into Area 1. And so they've always had the ability through the lizards or through, ropes or whatever to go up and get back into the Wormwrithings. But in their thinking, they're like, well, we've already been in that part. But the Wormwrithings themselves is just one big, vast, interconnected series of worm tunnels. So no matter where you're at in the Wormwrithings, you can kind of eventually pathfind and get kind of the way you're wanting to go. But they don't know that. So they were trying to find it. And there are a couple of other natural exits from the Worm Nursery. Area 7 leads to a natural exit. You kind of go up like a mini cliff, and then there's an exit out, and then Area 13 is an exit. And then, that when that worm busted into area 10, that created probably an exit to the Wormwrithings. And I told them they had an exit from area 2 when it burrowed out that way. I said it actually, you see that it like went down. But the Wormwrithings are three-dimensional, 360 degrees. It's not just right and left. I mean, sometimes you're going up, sometimes you're going down, sometimes you're at an incline, sometimes you're level. But anyway, so they finally decided to go back out area 1. And from there, they took a long rest, and they went to find the vast oblivion, which is the book just says it's 12 miles from the Worm Nursery, but they had specifically asked me because Vizeran had given them some directions, and I just said west. So they're which is kind of works against me because now they're thinking, well, we got to go to west, and it's, they're not taking the three-dimensional 360 degree nature of the Wormwrithings in. They're trying to go, they're thinking too much on that, which is, they don't know that. I mean, it's hard to say stop thinking that way without giving something away to the players. So just let them goose chase that stuff sometimes because they're logically trying to think things through. So what I'm going to do, they did make it to the vast oblivion, and search a little bit of that out. However, I'm almost positive that the entirety of the next session will be a beholder fight, because they literally finished as the beholder was floating down towards them. And I want to cover it all in one video, if possible, the vast oblivion and the beholder. So I'm going to stop at this point. I still have my notes, but I'm going to do it in next video. How to get to the vast oblivion. There's this weird eyes thing that happens the closer you get. The weird layout of the vast oblivion. There's no maps in the book for some strange reason. I think there should be diagrams and stuff, but they didn't. And again, Elven Tower and other resources are really good for trying to get a handle on it. But suffice it to say, next video, we will be talking about not only the vast oblivion, and unless something just really, really, really weird happens, we're going to have a beholder fight. So stay tuned. I really appreciate all of my viewers and your feedback and all of that. I enjoy doing these videos for you. So thanks so much for watching. So we will next time behold. Next time, there will be a beholder. Thanks so much for watching Shane Plays. If you would maybe leave this video a thumbs up and a comment, that helps me out tremendously. Please tell your friends that you think might get some benefit from this about these videos. That helps me out a lot. And we will catch you next time on Shane Plays.
I was watching Poltergeist last month. I got a question. Why don't white people just leave the house when there's a ghost in the house?